The sun is a massive incandescent gas, a gigantic nuclear furnace where hydrogen is built into helium at a temperature of millions of degrees. Comedy rock bands, they might be giants, may not have been physicists, but they absolutely nailed the fundamentals of fusion power. Look, on this channel, we've previously talked about Dyson swarms, a means by which we could capture all the energy released by the sun to provide free power to all of humanity. We also discussed that while a Dyson swarm is possible, we aren't even close to being able to build one. And no, a Dyson sphere is not possible. I mean, it technically is, but it's so ridiculous, it's just like, no. Look, there are a lot of technological and logistical hurdles involved in building a Dyson swarm. One of the biggest hurdles is that the sun is really, really far away. But instead of flying all the way out to the sun to steal that energy, what if we just built our own little sun here on Earth? Look, this is the fundamental principle behind fusion power. Humans have been attempting to build a fusion reactor since the 1940s, and since the 1950s, scientists have consistently predicted that we're only about 3 decades away from successfully creating a source of clean and limitless energy. Though it's been about 80 years since that original estimate, scientists are still saying we're only a few decades away. Bloody scientists! But the question is, do they actually mean it this time? What is nuclear fusion? Now, you're probably familiar with the concept of nuclear fission, in which we take heavy elements like uranium and split the nuclei into 2 smaller atoms. This releases a large amount of energy, but also, unfortunately, a large amount of radiation. It also produces nuclear waste, which isn't ideal. We don't know what to do with it. While we're unlikely to ever see a disaster like Chernobyl again, Kevin, who wrote this, I'm not so sure, mate. Fukushima happened. I know it wasn't Chernobyl, but we don't expect these things, that they can happen, and it's scary. And proper management of nuclear waste has been figured out to the point that it's not really a concern anymore. I also have... I'm reading this. I've not read it before, and I just disagree. I think management of nuclear waste is a huge issue. It's just sitting in piles places and not properly buried or taken care of. We need to do something about it. But look, there's still a lot of stigma surrounding current nuclear power plants. And don't get me wrong, I love nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is the best thing that we have. I mean, other than renewable energy, but we're just not realistically there yet. Though the fears about nuclear energy are largely unfounded in this day and age, okay, they're unlikely to go away anytime soon. Luckily, nuclear fusion has been heralded as safe, clean, and unlimited energy, which wouldn't make it subject to those same fears. It's also been billed that way because it's absolutely true. If nuclear fission is the splitting of an atom into 2 smaller atoms, a basic understanding of the English language would seem to imply that nuclear fusion is the combining of atoms into larger atoms. Of course, just changing one atom into another isn't quite that simple, as alchemists discovered centuries ago. Lighter elements result in higher energy output. So, just like They Might Be Giants told us, we'll want to combine hydrogen atoms and helium atoms. And as we learned from their song, this process takes incredibly high temperatures, literally millions of degrees. The hydrogen first needs to be heated to become plasma, which will strip the electrons away from the nuclei. Unfortunately, nuclei are all positively charged, and this electric charge may cause them to repel one another. As temperatures rise, atoms move faster. The plasma will be heated to the point that the atoms are moving so quickly that the electromagnetic force can't repel them in time, and the nuclei smash into one another. This causes them to merge and form helium atoms, releasing massive amounts of energy in the process. In addition to having a more favorable public perception, fusion also produces significantly more energy than fission. There's also no radiation, no waste, and no risk of a f***-off massive explosion. In the event a fusion reactor broke down or ruptured, the plasma's temperature would immediately lower, causing it to just not be plasma anymore. That means the reactor would just start leaking hydrogen gas, which is totally fine. I mean, yes, hydrogen is flammable, but assuming we have the foresight not to build our fusion reactors out of wood, it's unlikely to cause any serious damage, even if it did ignite. The hydrogen would also be mixing with the existing air, so it may not even be concentrated to ignite anyway. In short, fusion energy would be an absolute game changer for all of humanity. We can't state that enough. It would change everything. Now, obviously, there are some challenges, most notably the required temperature. Some of you may have been wondering about the claim that it takes millions of degrees to cause nuclear fusion, since the surface temperature of the sun is only about 5,500 degrees Celsius. Well, it turns out that the sun has an unfair advantage in the form of pressure. Higher pressure results in higher temperatures, so while the surface of the sun is a mild 5,500 degrees C, all of the pressure at the core results in the massive massive temperatures required for nuclear fusion. Unfortunately, there's not really an option here on Earth. The pressure at the center of the sun is the result of the gravitational force of all of its mass. And the sun's really big. Look, the sun is over 300,000 times as massive as the Earth. That's a lot of pressure. Way more pressure than we could ever possibly generate. Now, while pressure may still play a role in the design of fusion reactors, it can't be the main driving force behind the temperature. That means we need to actually generate outrageously massive temperatures in order to make our nuclear fusion work. And just as a quick side note, if you've ever heard of cold fusion, this is why. Cold fusion is the theoretical idea of being able to perform nuclear fusion at something closer to room temperature. If that were possible, it would immediately solve every problem holding fusion reactors back, but it's probably not possible, so let's just move on. History of fusion reactors. One of the reasons that scientists keep insisting that we're close to having fusion reactors is because we've actually already built them and they actually work. The problem is that it requires more energy to power the reactor than they actually produce, making them a net loss rather than the free infinite energy that we're hoping for. Still, the fact that the problem is efficiency rather than whether or not it's even possible is a good sign that we could see this within our lifetimes. Rare on Science of Science Fiction, and I like it! The first fusion reactor was the Soviet-designed Tokamak. If the name sounds familiar, it's because we've talked about that before. The Tokamak creates a donut-shaped ring of plasma, which we actually discussed in our video about lightsabers. Considering the fact that until recently the Tokamak was still an unparalleled leading candidate for a fusion reactor design, it's not surprising that scientists haven't been using them to seriously pursue magical laser swords. It turns out that they consider free unlimited energy to be a better use of that technology, to the disappointment of Star Wars fans everywhere. These reactors are called magnetic confinement reactors. The plasma is guided through the donut-shaped reactor using powerful superconducting magnets. It is these change magnetic fields that allow the plasma to reach the required temperature. In the case of the Tokamak, that temperature is about 150 million degrees, which is 10 times hotter than even the core of the sun. In order to produce a practical fusion reaction, there were several conditions that these machines needed to produce. The good news is that by the late 1970s, they had produced every condition necessary. The bad news is that there wasn't a single reactor that could produce all of them, and some could be produced in the same reactor, but not simultaneously. Even so, it is easy to see why scientists must have felt we were close. While the Cold War may have fueled the space race, it quickly became clear that no single country had the resources to build a fusion reactor that would produce more energy than it consumed. And by quickly, we mean almost 30 years after the first Tokamak was built. In 1985, Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev decided that Cold War be damned, it was time to join forces to build the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, or ITER. Things improved, but progress was slow and reactors still aren't at break-even yet. The current record holder for the highest fusion output is the Joint European Torus, or JET, located in Oxfordshire in the United Kingdom. JET has managed to operate at 67% efficiency, meaning it can produce 2/3 of the energy that's used to power it. In 2021, it set a record for sustained output at 10 megawatts per second for 5 seconds. And yeah, we probably should have mentioned that all of these fusion reactors are quick pulses that are over in a few seconds or less, so we'd need to improve on that. Though JET isn't even breaking even on power output, its increasing numbers are extremely promising. They were produced using a fuel made of deuterium and tritium, two isotopes of hydrogen that are ideal for fusion reactions. It's hoped that the progress made at JET will show further gains at ITER when it's finally online. Despite the plan being greenlit in 1985, construction on ITER isn't actually complete yet. The current timeline for testing is for ITER to begin in 2025, though this was recently pushed back from 2020, so it could be subject to change, as it seems everything is with nuclear fusion. The Tokamak has been the standard design for most fusion experiments, but there is another. The Stellarator works in a similar fashion, but with one major design change. Instead of creating a symmetrical ring of plasma, the Stellarator turns the plasma into a ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. The design of the Tokamak only allows it to propel the plasma in short pulses in order to maintain its shape. The pulsing nature of the magnetic field can sometimes lose hold of the plasma, which runs the risk of damaging the machine itself. The Stellarator avoids the need for these pulses by instead guiding the plasma through a series of twists and turns that counteract the issues, resulting in the need for pulsating fields. A Stellarator should be able to run longer and more consistently, but it's not without its issues as well. For one thing, tests using Stellarators instead of Tokamaks are limited, so there's not nearly as much data. Another problem is the building of these bloody things. The machines are much more complicated to design and build, and as such, they have been prone to running late and over budget. But look, considering the potential payoff for a successful fusion reactor, cost probably shouldn't be that big of a concern. But the biggest problem for Stellarators is actually the plasma itself. The twisting nature of the stream of plasma results in particles falling out of the stream, reducing the overall efficiency. Since the record for nuclear fusion is a net loss of 33% energy, it's not surprising that the seemingly less efficient option was sidelined for so long. However, the Wendelstein 7X generator out of Germany has been making people rethink their assumptions about the viability of Stellarators. The reactor began construction in 2005 and it began testing in 2015. When it went online, the Wendelstein shattered every previous record for Stellarator reactors. After a few months of testing, it was taken offline so that upgrades could begin. The upgrades have finally been completed, and the next round of tests is expected to commence before the end of next year. Wrap up. Look, we know we can build a fusion reactor. We've been creating controlled fusion reactions in labs since 1958. But the big question is, how far are we from unlimited energy? That's a $22 billion question, the approximate cost of building ITER. As research has progressed, we've slowly but surely been getting closer. Every element required to make a commercially viable fusion reactor has been shown to work. It's just a matter of putting them all together. It feels like we're close, but it's felt like we're close since the 1950s, so I mean, who can really say? Remember, we're essentially trying to build a star in a laboratory. That ain't easy. After Wendelstein begins its next round of testing, and once ITER is finally turned on for the first time, perhaps we'll have a better idea of just how close the dream of unlimited energy is. Given all the progress that has been made, it would be easy to say that we'll have a viable fusion reactor within the next 30 years. I mean, who knows? Maybe ITER will work right out of the gates, meaning we're only a few years away from free energy. By all estimations, we should see a viable fusion reactor within our lifetimes. So here's hoping we really do, rather than just joining the legions of dead who were told exactly the same thing.